Welcome back to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game. I'm your host, DM Neal, aka Jote Maniac. Jack of all trades, master of none, in case you were asking. And today we have a very special guest. We have Derrick, we could call him DM Derrick, from the podcast How Not to DM. I say it in the audio and I'll say it here. If you're not listening, definitely go check out all the awesome stuff that Derrick is doing. Today we're talking about character growth for your player characters and when to use it, when not to use it, how to introduce it, all of those things, and how to put character growth into your game if you see fit. And of course, that's it. That's all I got. So rather than talk anymore, let's head to the meat.
I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meat?
The flank meat's back on the menu, boys.
So today for the meat, we have a very special guest. We have Derrick, the host of How Not to DM, a podcast that if you're listening to this one, I think it's one that you should absolutely go listen to as well. And simply, thank you, Derrick, for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Neal. And like you said, yes, you better go now into your podcast app and go queue up my latest episode right now, or else, bad things might happen. I don't know.
Yeah.
Don't risk it.
Yeah, don't risk it. I'm going to say that every time I'm guesting now somewhere else.
You should.
Like, don't risk it.
You never know.
I don't know what'll happen, but it can't be good.
We can't be held liable,
No.
Yeah.
So, as you well know, we're going to jump into our interview section for a little bit. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself that you think the listeners would enjoy?
Yeah, so I'm Derrick. I live in the great state of Utah. I have a podcast called How Not to DM. I've been doing it for a little over a year at this point, and it's been a lot of fun. I started the show with the idea of I wanted to interview all of my favorite DMs from actual play shows and streams and that kind of thing, because I love listening to other DMs run games, and I love picking up on the little things they do. When you run games and you watch other people run games, I feel like you notice stuff more than the lay person might notice. And so I loved kind of like finding ideas from the decisions they were making, or picking up on little house rules they put in and that kind of thing. And I really wanted to get them on the record telling me what their ideas were, why they were doing the things they were doing, and then also talking about some of the mistakes they made so that all of us can avoid them when we're running our own games. So that's where the idea came from. It's been going really well. I started off with just a friend locally, and it's kind of expanded from there. I've had a lot of great guests. I've had people who write games, design games, who run streams, who run podcasts, and everything in between in the tabletop arena. And so, yeah, a lot of different perspectives. There's something for everybody, and a guest that everybody's going to find interesting too, I think.
Awesome. Is there anything else that you're working on? And the fun thing I always get to say that you can talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. So many NDAs out there. So I'm currently working with a couple of friends who have been on my show in the past on a new studio. Name is Influx. But basically we're working together to make our own shows better, but then combine forces and think of new, fun, interesting content to create. We've got some ideas for some short streams and other podcasts, some game shows, that kind of thing. We just started a new show called The Role of Cool. You should go check that out as well. It's a stream by some of our friends in the Philippines, and they're running through the Sina Una campaign book by Hit Point Press. And so it's really cool. They're all Filipino. They're telling stories about the islands of the Philippines pre-Spanish colonization, that kind of thing. So really cool. That's kind of our first thing we've been working on. So yeah, go check that out. JR is a really good DM. Hopefully I'll have him on my show soon. But yeah, that's a little bit about what I've been working on, kind of this studio stuff. So yeah.
Yep. So the surprise question is one that I have. What is the funniest thing you've heard in terms of how not to DM? I figured it's a great anecdote that we can add that'll further promote the podcast. But can you think of one funny thing that someone has said on how not to DM?
There are a lot of funny stories, but usually they're like the good moments that people remember, not the bad moments. I guess I'll use myself as an example. This
Perfect.
is a story I've told a handful of times, but hopefully it's new to most of the listeners here. So it was my very first time running a game. We had just finished playing through Lost Mine of Phandelver. We were playing at work with coworkers at lunchtime. I loved it. And getting to the kind of middle or end of that adventure, I was like, I'm going to go write my own thing and we're all going to play it and everyone's going to have so much fun. This DMing thing sounds so cool. So I had a Google Doc. I wrote a bunch of notes. I had this idea and I planned this city to the south along the coastline where there's going to be this cult trying to summon a demon, general standard D&D stuff. And the first session, my players show up into town. They get contacted by the person who's in charge, tells them to go look at this camp in the south of the town where they believe these cultists are holed up. They get there. It's a bunch of abandoned tents. And I have the cult leader sitting there just like laughing maniacally, like, oh, they're all gone. They're infiltrated the city. They've infiltrated the city. You'll never find them. Our plan isn't work. And I had this NPC planned like, okay, they're going to arrest him. They're going to take him back and then they're going to question him or whatever. They're going to find out all the information they need to know. My brother, who was working with us and who was playing with us at the time, takes one look at me and he's like, no, you know what? I wave down the first farmer I see in a cart and I'm going to pay him a few gold to take this person as far away as possible. Take this cult leader like out into the boonies, just like take him away and drop him off somewhere so that he can't cause any more trouble. And so my very first session, this was like the third encounter or whatever, immediately my whole plan crumbles down around me. And, I learned the lesson really quickly. Hey, you can't think what the players are going to choose. You can't set anything up because they're going to destroy it. They're going to tear it to shreds. They're going to stamp on it and toss it out the window. And then they're going to go do their own thing. And so, yeah, it took like a couple of minutes for me to like think what I was going to do instead. And I figured it out and everyone still had a ton of fun and it worked out just fine. But yeah, that was like my baptism by fire. Like, okay, that plot point you had, this NPC who's got all this information they need, he's gone now. He's probably dead. Like, go figure out what you're going to do instead. So that's my how not to DM story. That was my example from my own life there.
That's so good because well done to your brother because he bamboozled 2 DMs in this instance because
Yes,
I was like, obviously he's going to put them in a cart and send them away. I'm just like,
yeah.
Oh, that, okay, you ruined this story, I guess, but like, did you make another story? Did he just do the same thing where the farmer took them? Oh, wow. Okay. Does he just like take over the farm and like make like tainted crops to like, but wait, my original story is, oh man. But I seriously was like, oh, yeah, he's just going to kill him. Like that's right. No, not at all. Okay, great.
Nope. Well, and I had like the leader of the town had given them like, here's official paperwork for each of you. You're an official guard of the city now. So you can arrest people. You can do whatever a normal guard would do, kind of giving them like their badge essentially to enact justice. And so I assumed they were either going to kill him or take him in, know, and see what information they could get out of him. Nope. No, they just did exactly the thing I hadn't planned. And it was okay. It turned out just fine. But yeah, that was so funny. And whenever I tell the story, I laugh just because it's so out of left field for me. Baby DM. Like now I wouldn't even blink if someone did something like that. But then it was just like, what do I do?
All right. Well, thank you for that answer. And that leads us straight into the topic at hand. And if you heard from the intro, we'll say it again here, but we're going to be talking all about character growth. And for your player characters, I mean, maybe your players need some character growth as well. And if we're being 100% honest, it will happen through D&D. It is a surprisingly effective tool at a great many things. But for now, we're just going to focus on player character growth. And so one of the questions I like asking is because as long as we've had the podcast, finding topics to discuss becomes difficult as the podcast ages. So what I did is I had sent you over a list of certain topics. And so my first question to you is what stood out to you? Like what drew you to the concept of character growth as a discussion topic?
Yeah. So I know how hard it can be to think of ideas for a show. So especially one that has the longevity that DM's Block does. So I appreciate the effort on your part, but yeah, This stuck out to me mostly because it's a lesson I learned in my own games and realizing that I should focus on character growth and kind of along with that, what the players want their characters to experience and to do and to grow into is really what is kind of like a cornerstone of engagement and immersion in the games that you run. So that's why it stuck out to me. It's a lesson I learned and one that I continually try to improve on, but one that I know is really important when you're talking about long-term, engaging, interesting games for people that you love playing with.
Yeah, and it was one that we had either pulled from our Discord or came up somewhere else. But I think one of the things that drew us to the topic or me to the topic is that it doesn't always come up as a thing. Because there's certainly games that you can play in where there is a grand total of 0 character growth for your entire party. Which again, everything is fine. As long as everyone at your table thinks it's fine, it's fine. But that said, I think adding some level of character growth, especially for those players that do want that, I think it's very important to have that, because then you could have that engagement, because that may be the piece that they're most interested in, especially if it is part of the player. I mean, we all put a little bit of ourselves into every character. That's just how that works. So that character growth could be something that draws them and keeps them at your table because they are doing those things.
For me, character growth as well as something that separates D&D and TTRPGs from like video games and other things, right? Like you could play hundreds and hundreds of hours of Skyrim, but as far as like character growth, it doesn't really exist, right? You gain stuff, you get more powerful, but because it's a video game, you don't really like make real consequential decisions based on morality and this and that, you know, and it doesn't have an impact on how the world sees you. I mean, does that make sense? Like you can kill people in a town and like the guards will come after you or whatever. But as far as like real character growth of this this character that you're portraying, there's not really a real world equivalent or a video game or other kind of medium equivalent I can think of that really matches the growth that you can experience in a role-playing game like D&D.
Yeah, nothing that you can play. There are certainly things that we could all choose to observe, either read or watch, but there's nothing you could play, because I think the video game analogy is good in the sense that you, as the character, haven't changed much. The world around you has adapted to the choices you've made, but for the most part, you haven't changed. And I think, though, that the character growth is also the ability to use character growth in such a nuanced way in your D&D game is one of the reasons why I think the alignment system is so tough for people, is because character growth happens, but it's not this big quantifiable thing, because once you jump from one to the other, it doesn't show that arc. It doesn't show that progression. It's just, I am no longer lawful good. I am chaotic good. So it feels like such a hard line, because in a video game that would be, I crossed an arbitrary threshold that was put into lawful versus chaotic points. And once I got to enough chaotic points, which is literally just one more than the lawful points, now I'm chaotic. So I think framing it that way as the video game to illustrate how much more you can do in D&D is really good.
Yeah, you made a point there, like it just kind of being algorithmic, but also like the jump between alignments is really tough to portray. And you're right, like me as a human, I make choices across that spectrum every day, right? I'm making choices that could be considered one alignment or another alignment. Like nobody does the same thing every single time. And no one makes those same decisions every single time. And so why would you expect a character, you know, to make decisions only based on this one defining characteristic? No, they're going to make lots of different decisions that may fall in any one of those categories if you want to define them. And that can adjust the way they feel or the way their character grows or not. But yeah, I think oftentimes I find alignment to be kind of rigid, and I think it limits the creativity of players. They feel like they have to do the thing that their character would do based on one of these boxes in this grid of 9, you know, instead of doing what a normal human would do, which is making lots of different varied decisions. When
we say character growth, like what does that mean to you? because I think continuing to define it through the conversation is certainly probably the most helpful piece of the whole conversation, because it's interesting to harken back to something we've said before, is the idea that I've got a stick and I've got a torch and I'm going into the dungeon, and like a week later I can cast Wish and basically change the topography of this entire nation with the wiggle of some fingers. So from a true mechanical perspective, it is always interesting, but like that's not necessarily what I think of when I think of character growth.
Yeah, I think it can be part of it. I'm bringing up Critical Role because it's just so well known. Season 1, each of them kind of go through some sort of trial or mini arc that then develops them into something more. I'm thinking specifically Keyleth going through those trials in different druidic tribes and therefore getting like more powers. And, he was kind of like when you leveled up, you all did this thing and that's what causes her to level up and then learn this new skill. So that's one way to go about it. And I think mechanics certainly play a part in it. But you're right, it is more nuanced than that. I think character growth a lot of the time factors into their experiences and how it shapes the way they view the world, and then also how they interact with the world after those. For instance, one of my characters in my current game, we're kind of playing in a homebrewed Forgotten Realms. So he was from Neverwinter. We returned to Neverwinter. I said, there's going to be some things here and there happening. What are you interested in this town? What can you give me from your backstory? And so he's like, yeah, I have this rival and there's, this stuff and that stuff going on. And character growth can be based around achieving goals that are different than mechanical goals. Instead of like leveling up and getting an extra attack, it can be avenging your family, or it can be learning this new thing from the tribe or from the elders of this druid circle. There's a lot of different ways you can kind of shift it, but yeah, it doesn't have to be purely mechanical. I think it should be both things in concert, mechanics and also how people treat them, how they're viewed. By doing good deeds, you get the eye of important people on you. They appreciate you for helping rid the city of bandits or whatever, and then all of a sudden the city loves you, and that can be character growth, right? Or you make a bad decision and they drive you out of town because they see you as a menace or a villain, and that can be character growth in a different way. It doesn't have to be strictly heroic, depending on what kind of game you're playing. But yeah, I love trying to make the world adapt and change and feel like what the players are deciding to do means that the world sees them differently, and when they are playing it reacts differently to them.
Looking at the background of the character, be it the mechanical background of what have they chosen, sailor, and looking at those kind of things and having, like you said, is it a rival? Is it a previous captain that they see as down on their luck, and that changes who their character is to like part of that character growth is like reestablishing that captain to be who they used to be. Or you think and I also think of using that background because it happens a lot in real life, where you go back to your past and you turn into the past person.
Yes, I was with some high school buddies recently. Yeah, it was kind of like that. No, I was just I experienced it in real life recently, that exact phenomena.
I think of often because you mentioned you have siblings. I'm an only child, but my wife has siblings. Often when you return to that sibling set, you're just like, we have all reduced our age greatly, and we have all turned into the people we used to be, and we are those sorts of things. Like when you go back, so that you can also use that as a catalyst for observing character growth and helping to increase that character growth. And there's an element of realism once you have that kind of thing happen, because I think like, you using your example is really good. The person's gone, they've done these adventures, they've grown, they can cast Wish, and they go back to Neverwinter, where let's just say that the person that is their rival has never left Neverwinter. That rival still has every ability, even as like a level 0 commoner, to bother the absolute crap out of your like level 15 fighter because it's their rival. And and so again, you can still illustrate that character growth by going into the background of whoever your player character is.
I like that. I like the giving them kind of reference points, and if you return them to a familiar situation, even if it's one that you haven't role played together, it's like, oh, we're going back to your hometown or whatever. People know that notice you're different, and people are treating you differently. You've got battle scars on your armor, and you've got this huge flaming sword, or whatever it is. People are going to treat you differently, and they're going to notice the growth in that way, and then it kind of makes it that much more real for the players. Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny. I just imagine just that super high level character just being so angry because you could have something so trivial is that like you still can't cook a pie as well as the other person. And they like, that's all you remember is like your inability to cook a pie better than this other person that's there. You're just so frustrated.
Yeah. The storyline was that this guy stole his family business, basically. So his family, and they were like rival families, and then one stole the other family's business. So he left town to go kind of seek his fortune elsewhere. Yeah. Came back. This guy's like, high ranking guard now, high ranking in the military, and rivalry ensues. So yeah, it was good stuff.
So the other one is, do you think there's a time that character growth shouldn't show up in a game?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I read it, when I was prepping, I was kind of trying to decide if I could think of a time where I thought it wouldn't matter. I think that there are times where someone might have grown a lot, but they might regress. And this is kind of like your example of like going back to what they were like before. But maybe you've got someone who was a criminal, and that's kind of like part of their backstory. They were part of some shady organization, but now they've turned a new leaf. They're trying to be good. But you get them in a situation and you tempt them enough that they like regress and they like go back to their old habits, or you put them in front of some people who kind of like remind them of what they used to be like, and they regress a little bit. That could be an interesting story, like not a fall from grace necessarily, but like struggling with past demons. I don't know. Does that show that there's not growth though?
Yeah.
I guess if you like regressed and then stayed like that, like you just forget all the things you've learned, forget all the friends you've made, and go back to your old ways, it could show that there's not been character growth. But I don't know about like times where I wouldn't use it. I'm trying to think of, I don't know, what do you have?
So I think I think one shots, like I would be hesitant to utilize it. Certainly that way. The other thing that I was thinking, and I really, fun fact, totally just put it on there because I was like, that sounds right. I don't know that I had an answer until now that we're having the conversation. The other one I think of is that, and I think because part of this is you do have to look at a lot at like your own life and just the real world. Just because you, the DM, think, and I think it talks back to your funny anecdote of like, oh, they'll totally arrest him, and I'm like, nah, they'll totally kill him. No, they're going to drive him off into the forest, and I'm just like, oh, right. Okay.
Neither of us knew what was happening there.
Wow, okay. But just because you incite what is basically like an event that you think should be a catalyst for growth does not mean that there will be any growth. Because
that's true.
Either your player doesn't think that should be, or they think their player character wouldn't have grown from that experience. Because like I can think of, a lot of people that go to college that ends up being a catalyst for growth because you're just introduced to so many new people, so many new ideas that oftentimes that is a catalyst for growth. That doesn't mean that everyone grows in that environment. Just like you could set up the death of a family member for one of the player characters. That doesn't mean it is a catalyst for growth. So I think that's the other time is if you don't see that there's an engagement from the player for their character, that's got to be what it is.
It's true. You could give them hooks and they might ignore them for one reason or another. And yeah, that is a good example. I'm trying to think if that's happened to me specifically where I've like, I don't know, my players are really nice to me. Like they can tell when I'm giving them a hook, and most of the time they bite, so It doesn't happen a ton, but that is a great example. And I guess like in some podcast stuff I've listened to, that's happened, right? Like it's like a big moment and then they just turn around and walk away, oh no, I'm not dealing with this. And I don't know if that, I guess that's showing that they don't want to engage in that way and would rather keep things the way they are. And totally valid.
Yeah. And at that point, you have to figure out, is the player not interested in growth at all, which is also okay, or is it that the player character isn't engaged with growth in that moment?
Right. Yeah, that brings up a good point that I think is a big part of this character growth stuff, is like figuring out what your players want to do. That might be part of it, as well as I've made a more conscious effort to like say, what are you interested in? What do you want to try to do? Where do you see your character going? And then giving them opportunities to do that. That's something that players are much more likely to engage in, instead of like, pulling a fast one on them. And I'm not going to say don't do that. It's fun to surprise them every once in a while. And I love, thinking up crazy things and putting it in front of them and seeing what they do to solve it. But I think there's something to be said for making sure that you're all on the same page and that it is something interesting for them. And if it's not, then so be it.
So the other one is, can we think of the best, and of course, if we have them, the worst times we've tried to use character growth inside of our games? Either certainly as either players or the person running the game, either which way.
Another example that I've really enjoyed has been, so in my current game, I've had a few things happen where the gods in the pantheon have become really involved in what's happening on the material plane. And that has meant that a lot of my players are like, well, I want to start like multi-classing into paladin or cleric or whatever.
Okay.
And so that's been interesting. I'm not trying to force it on them, but my brother, the same one who sent the crazy dwarf cult leader off on the farm cart in my first game.
Yes,
he's a current player. His kind of backstory was like he lost his wife in this terrible shipwreck. And his life has kind of been like not pointless, but his character sometimes lacks motivation or is unsure of what he should do next because he misses her so much, I guess. Like he's torn up about it and he wishes he was with her again. And so a lot of like I've given him a few interesting plot hooks where he's been able to communicate with her and she's like, no, you've got something to work on, you've got something to do. And that's been really cool because it's stuff I talked with him about before, but just the way that it role plays and the way that his character redoubles his efforts or is more motivated after these contacts with someone he loves and realizing that he's got a greater purpose than to just live and die. That's been a lot of fun, and it's really cool to see his character shift from kind of like how would I describe it? He's playing a barbarian, a Goliath barbarian who ran like a little shipping business, basically a shipping company, and now he's adventuring. But he was kind of motivated by a few things at the beginning, but his motivations have shifted and changed from simple like I'm doing this just to protect my business to now he's got a much bigger view of saving the world, that kind of thing. As D&D campaigns tend to gravitate toward. So yeah, that's been a really good example, I think, is giving him more motivation and giving him more things to interact with in the world that make his character grow into the hero that is going to eventually, hopefully, save the plane they live on. I feel like that's a good example for me of the best time, like giving this character something to engage with that makes them more than what they were before. What about you?
Yeah, I think a couple of like personal ones, because then it's easier to like really think of like some of the reasons why they may be happening. Is like I was in like a convention game over several days where it was a high level Eberron campaign, and in the end the group chose to go back in time and basically stop, go back in time, kill the king before he starts the war, and like try it again. And so that was a lot of character growth for seemingly most people, because it's like you're having to have this, like, I think we had like an hour-long discussion of whether or not to do it, to like go and try and reset, or kind of try and fix what's here, or do a full reset and try and fix it from the past.
That's a lot for a convention game too. Yeah.
Well, it was when I was at D&D in a castle, and so it was like 3 days.
Oh yeah,
3 full days of play.
Who was your DM?
Satine Phoenix.
Cool.
Yeah, and so we did a high level Eberron campaign. It was back before the Eberron had been released, and clearly she had an early copy from Keith. Keith Baker. So then, yeah, we were doing that high level play. But ultimately it was to go back and stop the war. And do you do that? Do you not? Not only are you thinking about like character growth in the moment, but you're thinking about character growth forward, because now not only are you the people that made that choice, you need to lead that choice and be like the paragons of change, because you kind of reset the whole deal. So you needed to be those people. So that was also the continued discussion of like, not only did your character grow in this game, but how does your character continue to grow? Which I guess is an interesting thought that a lot of character growth can be talked through and like an epilogue.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
Like that. The other one I think is, and it is literally only this conversation now, which is the joy of these conversations, that I am realizing that one of the added benefits to play by post is the potential for more character growth, because things happen at a slower pace in the sense of rolling and combat, and a lot of the mechanical stuff. It just works differently. But I've had a lot of character growth because you have a lot more conversations. You can have side conversations. So in that one, I play Shatter Kai, who is basically subverting expectations. Is that like the chaotic nature is more of a positive bent. Like, you know, I could do the super like washed out tones and super cool gritty 90s, and I've got all this leather and things like that. But there was more of just like more of like the positive nature of just like, no, you know, like I'm beholden to the Raven Queen. So when it's my time to die, it's my time to die. So then why not just live the most life I can live up until that moment? Because it's a little bit out of my hands. So here we go. And then like, you know, and so part of the, like the negative trait is of that character is to like kind of try everything, because why not?
Why not?
Yeah. But there's a lot of character growth to try and develop like, okay, that's a different approach to the Shatter Kai. Can you bring the rest of those people with you to do this adaptive change for not just you, but an entire race within the world?
Yeah. Interesting. That Eberron example sounds similar to the kind of stuff that my players are going through now, like really high level, big decisions to make. And I think that oftentimes it's the character development up to that point that influences the way they're going to make those decisions, which is, I think, yeah, that's a very good time to like, hopefully you've had a lot of character growth coming up to that point so that everyone feels good about the decisions they're making, and it kind of makes sense with the, you know, what they've done so far. Best times. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like character growth is always interesting. And like you said, one shot's probably not the best time to try to break out like a bunch of really interesting, you know, nuanced things for them to learn. But yeah, I feel like if you're doing any kind of campaign a little bit longer than that, it's a great idea to try to see what kind of character growth everyone's interested in and try to facilitate that. Worst times though? Yeah, I would say you gave an example, and we kind of talked a little bit about giving them something to engage with and then they choose not to. I guess I would just be careful with those times, just to make sure that it's not like a big change to their character or their backstory without them knowing first, like killing off a bunch of people or whatever without any kind of warning, or I don't know, stuff like that. I would just be careful about trying to force the growth in that way. Like what you think they should do, or what you think how you think they should be growing, and trying to facilitate that by like taking their agency away and giving them or like making a bunch of really terrible things happen. You know, depending on the game you're playing, if everyone is interested in like a real gotcha slaughter fest, and then I guess you can do it. But, you know, not my style of game for sure.
Yeah, because that was kind of the one I think of is like I found it interesting one time where rightfully like a player was no longer interested in playing a character. Totally fine. So I used that as an opportunity to kill that character because they were okay with it. I did double check that they were okay with that happening. Nobody really minded that the character had died. And I was like, all right, that's cool. That's kind of weird.
That's so awkward.
But that's fine. Moving on. Here's a new person.
Oh geez.
Cool. Let's continue the adventure. And it was still a lot of, I mean, the campaign itself was still a lot of fun, but it was also just kind of weird. Just like, oh wow, you guys really took that in stride. All right. No growth.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great example. And really awkward. I don't know how I'd handle it. Maybe
Yeah.
try to like bring up some random people from their past who would care, who like find out and are sad, and like try to get everybody to be like, yeah, I guess they were okay. I don't know. That's tough, but that's funny.
So we're getting close, so we can move to what I think is my favorite time, and I've been holding something up until this moment. But we can move on to homework, which is basically like we're saying. Again, I don't think we can really do video games, but are there things that you and I can think of that are good examples of character growth that people could read, listen, watch those things?
Yes, I feel like Star Wars is a big one, just because again, so well known. But you've got Luke's arc, you've got Anakin's arc, both very interesting, very different kinds of growth. I think that's a good example. Avatar, The Last Airbender, I think Zuko's story is really interesting, a really interesting example of character growth, and all of them kind of go through it. And that's like one you could watch with kids and stuff too, if you've got them around. Jeannie D put out a video recently that I watched in prep for this. I guess it was a year ago, but she put out some videos about like character background and growth and like ideas for ways to improve your character and to make them change and grow throughout the time you're playing. So those are some examples off the top of my head of stuff that's really accessible. Yeah, what you got?
Yeah, so I'm going to throw an interesting one at you because it is one of the more interesting ways. I think it may be difficult to do in your game. Because there's also the version where you explain how a character has grown into the one that they are. And I think one of the really good examples of that in modern media is Jack Sparrow from the Pirates of the Caribbean. Because for all the movies, there's not a big difference in who that character is or how they present themselves. But throughout those movies, you start to understand why. Because you see glimpses into their backstory. You meet people that they've already interacted with that are tied to what made them who they are. So that's another way to implement some character growth, is to show that progression as to how it happened. Maybe you're not doing as much actual growing because the character is who they are.
That's an interesting idea. You just have to work with a player on it. I feel like you could have them like drop hints and like tell stories that kind of bring that context. That'd be interesting. Also, I feel like it'd be really easy to pull off with an NPC, villain or not. Like, hey, why are they the way that they are? Here are some clues and stuff that you just drop along the way that kind of like inform them. Oh, they're doing these things, but it's actually for a good reason, or there's a reason why they are like this. That's an interesting example. Like you said, not a lot of character growth during the actual arc, but you learn a lot about them.
Yeah, and
then you're like, oh, well, that's why he's
this
like
makes sense. Yeah. Well, I also think of like most actual plays are probably going to get you where you need to go. I mean, if you're willing to dive on Critical Role, more power to you. But the one I think of, because it's in both our minds because he was a guest recently, and we mentioned it maybe on the pod or right before. But Bombarded is a really good look at a lot of character growth, because you have a lot that happens in there. I mean, one character loses their father. Other characters are reconnected with their past, with their parental units. So there is a lot of character growth, certainly from them like starting out to them, doing the world saving but like you said, most D&D campaigns lead to. Yeah.
Bombarded is, the episodes are less than an hour and there's only 80 something of them, 87, 88. So if you're looking for an actual play that's less heavy, that's a good one to go check out. Yeah. That's a great point. Kyle, when I had him on my show a few weeks ago, I think he mentioned they had like multiple session zeros, and they had one halfway through the campaign to just like double check and make sure everyone was cool with where the direction things were going, and kind of like weigh in on future stuff. So, and obviously actual plays are a little bit different than just playing around your table, because they're meant for audience and they're meant for consumption. And so the more character growth they've got, the better. But I think you can easily replicate that kind of feel around your own table, even if it's just for you and your friends.
The other one I think
Yep.
of, and this is super rant. I feel like I don't bring up how much I love the Ninja Turtles on the podcast because it doesn't necessarily apply all the time. But the current run of the IDW is really good at character growth, just in the sense that like it starts out fairly traditionally, the four turtles, Master Splinter, and we go from there. And they've done a lot of character growth because, whatever, people die, super important people die if you end up reading the series, and it still does a lot of the classic stuff where like they go to space and they time travel, but they still, and I think that's the other thing, is they still roll back and then do like these smaller scale stories, and I think that's one of the good things about that character growth is that it's both told through these, for them literally time and space are being traversed, or they're still back in the sewers and still dealing with personal problems and doing that character growth.
Yeah. Have you ever played the role-playing game, the Turtles role-playing game?
The Palladium game? You mean that all of the things that I have like in this desk that I'm sitting at?
The very same, yes. I have never played them, but they sound really cool.
Yeah, and so there are certainly some hard pieces of the times that they were written in, but for the most part, they are a lot of fun.
Yeah, from the 80s and 90s. Yeah, I'm sure there's... Anyway, we won't delve into that. Yeah, that's all good examples. Trying to think if there's any more specific ones I can think of that are good. Character growth. I don't know. Basically... Ooh, you know what? I've been watching Breaking Bad recently. That's interesting. It's a descent into madness, a descent into crime, and what lengths will you go to provide for your family or do what you think is a good thing? How bad will you go? So that's interesting. That's a good example of a downward slide. Yeah. But there are a lot of different characters who grow in different ways during the show. So interesting one to check out.
Have you ever watched that show before?
I am mid season 4 right now. This is my first pass though. Okay. I got halfway through. I hit the part where the planes crash and I was like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. So I stopped, but I'm back. I'm going to finish it.
Okay. Yeah. So I was watching it when it was coming out. So I was watching the episodes as they were releasing. One of the things I will note, and I think it speaks really well to the point.
Yeah.
And it's not going to ruin anything. It's just going to blow. It's just going to still blow your mind when you get there, is the amount of time that hasn't passed.
Like how short of a time it was. Yeah.
Because where he makes his age with the bacon in the breakfast. So basically, like, it's his birthday and there's a pancake, and basically with bacon they write his age.
Oh, I see.
That will happen again, and then your mind will go like, wait a minute, it's been like 1 year since all this has been happening, and the character that was and the character that is, and how short of a span of time it has been that all these things have happened and all like this progression has occurred.
Yeah, it kind of is the same vein of like going into a dungeon and then a month later coming out and having wish at your disposal. Same kind of idea. Yeah. I think there's examples all over. Whatever your favorite media is, there's bound to be some examples of character growth. I think it's kind of funny though. There's an example of not character growth or no character growth. My background here, nobody can see it, but it's Seinfeld's apartment, Jerry Seinfeld's apartment. And that show, when they started out writing it, the guy who produced it, Larry David, said, all right, there's going to be no growth. There's going to be no learning. There's going to be no hugging. Like those were his 3 rules at the beginning of the show. And so it's a show where nobody gets any better or worse. They are themselves. They never change, which is funny. I think people are constantly changing. And, I myself have changed a lot, even in the past year. So it's funny that it's kind of a hard concept to think of like and making work. But yeah, there's examples everywhere about change. Yep. And if you just take a little bit of time to analyze whatever you're watching or reading right now, you'll notice it.
Yeah, and I think that is probably you hit on it. I think that is the best piece of homework, is what is the piece of media that has already spoken to you the most? Mm-hmm. Go back, observe it with the lens of where is character growth happening.
Yeah, what's causing it?
Yeah, because I will all but guarantee you that is part of the piece that has drawn you, the person, to that media and kept you there, is the specific character growth inside of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So the most important question, where can people go to find what you're doing, where you're doing it, and all of those things?
Yeah, so you can head to my link tree for links to most relevant stuff. That's linktree/HN2DM. I'm sure Neal will throw that in the episode notes too.
It's true.
So you can go check it out. I'm most active on Twitter. That's at HN2DM, 5 characters. So you want to get a hold of me, you want to chat about character growth or about some of my recent guests or whatever, you can find me there. My podcast is published on just about all of the main players. So if you are looking to listen to the show, go check it out. You can start from the beginning, or you can pick any of the episodes in between that seem interesting to you. Just like DM's Block, I've got different guests on different subjects, but you don't need to listen to them in order or anything like that to get anything out of them. Each episode is its own thing. We talk about something different, I talk to somebody different. And so start at the beginning, pick ones you like, whatever works for you. Just go check it out and let me know what you think.
Perfect. And thank you for coming on. And, I might stumble my way over to your podcast. We might have you back on. Who knows? I'm excited either way.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Neal. And I'm looking forward to the chat on my show. It'll have to be a little bit later in the year, but we'll get it in for sure.
Perfect. We just want to thank Derrick again for coming on, spending some time with us, sharing his thoughts that other people have had, and hopefully we can have him on or we can go join him on his podcast. And of course, if you want to tell us how you've been using character growth in your game, you can always email us at dungeonmasterblock@gmail.com. And of course, if you see fit, head over to your Apple Podcast or podcast catcher of choice and leave us a review. It always helps. So I've been told it'll help us defeat the almighty algorithm. And of course, if you want to follow us on the social medias, you can go to Twitter at DMS_block, or you can like us on Facebook where we post our content there. And of course, as always, the Dungeon Masters Block is a proud member of the Block Party Podcast Network, where you can check out other shows like Detentions and Dragons, Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters, DMnastics, and more. And we just want to thank you for listening to the Dungeon Masters Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game. I'm DM Neal. Good night, good luck, and keep on Dungeon Mastering.
It's not inspiration, it's not wisdom, and it's bad advice.
Yeah, don't forget that if you feel like your players aren't growing enough, you should tell them they need character growth too.
Goodbye.